Yeah, Trump's been banned from running in Colorado. That's what's happened. And I wanted to talk about some of the details of it, because obviously this is quite an unprecedented thing. And here is the Reuters article talking about it. And it gives some important details. And a lot of this is sort of bogged down in sort of local Colorado law as well as constitutional law. So I'm not going to pretend to know all of this to a level that is comparable to a scholar of law. So I'm going to just recite what other people are saying, but that's normally what happens. So they say a slim majority of the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Trump is disqualified from appearing on the state's ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, which bars anyone engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding federal office. A lower court judge previously ruled that Trump's actions on January 6th, 2021, blah, 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 and then I'm going to carry on saying the Colorado Supreme Court paused its own ruling pending review by the US Supreme Court, which Trump said he will immediately seek. And then Reuters goes on to ask, will it stand? And they spoke to a few experts, and they said it's not clear how the Supreme Court would rule, but it is dominated by a conservative majority that includes 3 Trump appointees, some of whom are longtime skeptics of giving courts powers that are not based in legislation, which I think makes perfect sense in my mind. That was a top concern for the dissenting justices in the 4-3 Colorado decision, so it was quite close. One justice could have swung it either way, really.
They were also all Democrat-appointed judges. So the interesting thing here is 3 judges thought that this ruling was so egregious they couldn't even vote along party lines.
I didn't know that, so that's very interesting.
Well, because the district court, which was the lower one, which is why it got pushed up to the state Supreme Court, thought this wouldn't go through. So it got appealed, pushed up to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court swung 4-3 along Democrat partisan lines, and now it's going to be kicked up to the federal Supreme Court. One of the reasons why Reuters is obviously editorializing, saying they're a Trump appointee, so it won't pass through, is to try and put pressure on them to do so, because they've lost the affirmative action case, they've lost the abortion case, but the case that Trump did lose was obviously the Supreme Court didn't hear because of lack of standing, which doesn't make any sense. The election fortification cases about states like Pennsylvania illegally rushing through reforms to the state constitution to allow mail-in ballots. So there is a possibility here that actually the Supreme Court, even though this law, as we'll go through with the actual ruling, is completely bogus, the Supreme Court, despite Clarence Thomas's best efforts, could actually swing against Trump.
Yeah, I did consider that being a possibility because, of course, they do often find clauses in the constitutional law which might rule against what their actual personal political choices are. And there are cases whereby Supreme Court appointees have voted in ways that are counter to their perhaps convictions based purely on the actual law. And I've actually been through a fair few number of Supreme Court cases.
As we'll learn in here, there's not really any case history or precedent for them to rule using the 14th Amendment in this way. And the 14th Amendment wasn't written to apply to this particular case. And if it did, it would then get all the Democrats in a whole lot of trouble because of their various insurrections.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about that because I'm about to go through the wording of it, and then we can see how it might actually just start this tit-for-tat thing whereby the Republicans can then be like, well, hang on a minute, doesn't this apply to you just as much?
Sorry to interrupt the video, but I thought I'd announce that we have a new line of merch. This is our aesthetics collection. So I was thinking that in the face of AI art debasing the very concept of art, actually we'd do something quite positive. So we commissioned a series of paintings that were actually really beautiful and could be something that we could present outside of politics. So for example, we have this magnificent painting of a ship weathering a storm, which I thought was just really nice. And we have, of course, a glorious, sort of surrealist, giant white tiger drinking from a lake. But also there are other things that are just kind of interesting, such as the chap lost in cyberspace, or something that I thought might, in time for Christmas, make a great present for your mum or something like that, a beautiful cat lounging on some clouds. Basically, we wanted to do some stuff that wasn't just political, so things that were just nice and beautiful and interesting, because that's also a part of the world we want to curate. So you can go over to shop.lotus.com. Buying the merch is a really great way of supporting us and means that we can live past demonetization. And I'm sure they make great gifts for the folks as well.
So let's have a look at the 14th Amendment. This is, what is it? This is Section 3, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the disqualification from holding office. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of the state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. My goodness, sentences were very, very long, weren't they, at that time? But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So, obviously, the insurrection and rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. One might say, well, hang on a minute, does that not apply to the people who, like the district attorneys in Portland, who didn't prosecute the people who set up the Chaz? You know, that's a separatist state. That's a form of insurrection.
Well, not just that. The activists who occupied various Capitol buildings after the Tennessee school shooting, holding up 7 fingers, implying that the shooter themselves was also a victim. The feminists who stormed the Capitol building during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, the recent Palestinian protesters who attacked the DNC or even stormed the Cannon House building, which is on Capitol Hill. None of those, no. And it's because it's not about hypocrisy, it's about hierarchy.
Well, yeah, it's just they're selectively using whatever they can to destroy their political enemies. They're not applying the rules fairly. And I think that, to be honest, it's in no one's interest to start pulling this sort of thing out because it's only going to degenerate further. But at this point, I think it's only going to get worse.
I think it's just honest, though. Again, the idea that the processes were ever going to be neutral, no. You have to value neutrality in order for things to be neutral. And the Democrats don't value neutrality. They believe there is no truth but power. Therefore, they're just going to use power when they can to crush their political enemies, even if it doesn't make any sense.
So let's actually have a look at the write-up of the ruling. John, would you be able to go to page 98? Just type it in at the top. And then I should be able to take it from here. So here we're talking about the term insurrection. Well, the Colorado courts are anyway. And notice here that, notice here that they're talking about, there's the Noah Webster's dictionary definition, and then they go on to
use the 2002 version to
so
define
yes.
insurrection.
So rather than using perhaps legal terminology, they're just saying, well, here it is in a dictionary, this is our definition. And I'm not sure that's necessarily going to stand up in a court where there's perhaps a higher standard than simply, here is what a dictionary, which is the opinion of the people who wrote the dictionary, here's what they say.
Well, they've gone to this because the district court said, according to the definition of insurrection in the 14th Amendment, and this is the reason the media went with the term insurrection after January 6th, because they were pushing towards the use of the 14th Amendment to bar Trump from running again. They said, well, we can't actually apply the 14th Amendment to Trump. So then they've now gone to the loosest possible definition, according to Webster's dictionary, to try and make their argument fit. And it's because there's no case law precedent for using this in this way against a former president. It just doesn't exist. So they're just making it up as they go along.
Absolutely. And of course, there's the obvious case that Trump couldn't have done more to prevent January 6th from happening. It's worth mentioning as well, I've done a bunch of work on Jan 6th. So I've got this article which came out on the 12th of Jan. And I spoke to a photographer. I spoke to him for about 4 hours, who was there on both January 5th and 6th. And he photographed lots of stuff, all the different causes. That's the rear exit where Jacob Lang, the January 6th prisoner who was facing most charges, who I've also spoken to a couple of times. That's where he was allegedly in this rear exit where a lot of the violence happened.
How curious the US Capitol Police were not trying to pull down protesters, but instead just standing around giving them the finger. I wonder if they just
that wasn't the Capitol Police. That was a Capitol Police helmet that was being worn by one of the protesters.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, I have seen Capitol Police letting them in the building.
Yes.
So
that rear exit was the only point where there was actually any conflict because they were preventing them from going in. Whereas in lots of the other entrances, they're actually moving away the barriers and they're staying between the lines, and it's like a tour group. in some parts, right?
Well, at that rear entrance as well, where they were tearing down the barricades, that was happening well before Trump even finished his speech. So you can't even say that Trump had commanded for people to go to the Capitol and break in.
Yeah, it was 20 minutes before Trump had finished his speech. People were already, I suppose, having an altercation with the Capitol Police outside of the Capitol building.
Yeah, acting
So-
on
and
the
also-
advice of Ray Epps.
Because where Trump was and where this was going on, he couldn't actually see what was going on. And of course, he's giving a speech. It's not like he can get information handed to him or anything like that. So he couldn't have just been like, oi, cut it out, because he was just unaware of it going on. And it's also worth mentioning as well, me and Hugo, props if you remember Hugo, back in the good old days, we created a timeline of exactly what happened on January 6th. And this was made on January 7th when all the information was fresh. And we got all of the times down to the minute as to what exactly happened. And we linked external links to verify everything. And so this is a good resource if you actually want to know what really went down. Along with the photographs, you should get a relatively good picture of what happened. But I wanted to read some of the things from here because some of them are quite important to this recent ruling. So 1253 is the first important one. So some Trump supporters breached the outer barricade at the Capitol 20 minutes before Trump's speech at the ellipse ends. And then we moved to 112. There are more clashes with police underway and pepper sprays being used. Trump's speech finally ends, and other people at this point who are aware of what's going on are saying, you need to remain peaceful, stop doing this. Like other Trump supporters, other prominent voices.
Well, he said,
like you had Alex Jones, didn't you, with a megaphone saying, stop it. Don't you see this is stupid? This is a trap.
well, Trump himself said, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. And then after the Capitol had been breached, he made a video to then be posted on social media saying, go home in peace and love, which he was then banned for, and the video was taken down.
Yes. In fact, I've linked that here as well, just to show that it does exist. So 239, small protests are trying to enter through the buildings. Other protesters are telling them off. Some of them were actually beating up some of the vandals of the Capitol building for trying to destroy the Capitol building. So to present it as some sort of insurrection where, many of the insurrectionists are beating up the other insurrectionists, that doesn't really make sense to my mind. And at this point as well, he trumps, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful.
Well, he had asked the National Guard to be called in, and Nancy Pelosi told him no.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like they knew something might have happened ahead of time. I wonder if we'll get any information on this in the court ruling as to the fact.
Yeah, I believe one of my favorite galactic admirals has a term for this. It's a trap. Yes. So 313, this is the final part I'm going to read from this. Protests are entering various offices inside the Capitol building, and then Trump tweets again, I am asking for everyone in the US Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. I mean, it can't really get more stark than that in my mind. And then just to prove the point, the tweets are still up. Please support our Capitol Police. That one, the time's not right because it's converted to British time. But if you're American or you have a VPN set to America, you'll be able to verify the time as well. And here's the other one as well. That's the one I just read out. So, obviously, this is being misrepresented. And I know that this is sort of common, well-trodden ground, but I wanted to refresh everyone's memory of it because it was 2 years ago, right? So it's important stuff, and particularly when it's getting to a Supreme Court case. The devil is in the details here.
Well, one of the details they use as well during the Colorado ruling is they try to draw upon information from the January 6th committee, which was improperly formed because it didn't have the right number of bipartisan representatives, even representatives among the Republican Party were never Trumpers, but they admitted hearsay evidence, and they knowingly did so, and even the Colorado ruling acknowledged they did so and said, we're still going to use the evidence anyway, even though it was improper. And they had that mad woman who said that Trump leaned through the glass door of the Beast limousine to try and take control of the wheel and drive backwards.
Yeah,
that should instantly discredit it when you contrast it with what Trump was actually doing on Twitter and on video.
That doesn't make any sense, does it? But yeah, this is the video that got removed. I'm not going to play it, but you can find it linked in the sources down below on the website. So
But none of this really matters, though, does it?
What do you mean? As in, it's not necessarily, they're not going to look at the evidence. This is more for us to show that, yes, actually, they
I
are full
understand.
of it, right?
Don't get me wrong, it's important to discredit their obvious lies. But that's the interesting thing. I mean, you're mentioning the January 6th committee. The amazing thing that came out of that is that no one cared. You may remember the viewership numbers when CNN tried to endlessly cover it, the polling of people, what they thought of it, of this story as well. No one gives a crap about the narrative they tried to conjure up, which obviously they had to try, and it's good to discredit the obvious lie. But all of this is just, as Tucker Carlson said, they hate Trump, and they will do literally anything to make sure he doesn't win.
I think the whole January 6th and the insurrection terminology, it's like a casus belli to then go on to do even more egregious things that they might not have otherwise gotten away with.
But this is what terrifies me about this story, is that you get this attempt in Colorado to make sure that people aren't allowed to vote for the man that they hate. And of course, this is probably going to get thrown down by the Supreme Court, is the understanding. But if they're willing to do that, and they're not really happy enough with that, they're going to go further. What exactly are they willing to do? Because I'm sure you'll have it, which is some lieutenant of Colorado wrote to every other state asking them to explore every possible way that their state could get him banned.
California's now investigating it formally.
Yeah, it's not just this
I've
one.
got that. Yeah, I'm going to pull that up in a sec.
I don't really know what the limit is here for these people. And
This isn't even peak blue on yet.
And this is the mad thing, because we're not dealing with like a country that's split down the line on this issue. As the polling shows of people's opinions of the Jan 6 committee, because it was just so mad, as you rightly say, no one believes any of this crap, that this is actually logically coherent. So instead, you just have this, 20% of the country sort of rabidly believing anything the Democratic elites say, which is, we hate Trump, we have to keep him out at all costs. And they're alone in that belief. So if they just keep pushing this, I mean, what happens if you end up kicking Trump actually off a few ballots?
Well, no matter what, no one's going to accept the 2024 election. Like,
and that's the sort of thing that in Yugoslavia caused the civil wars.
Yeah.
Like, I hate to be the Tim Pool guy. There's like civil wars coming. But sincerely, this is actually the end of democracy. This isn't some hyperbole from CNN host who's like, my black son can't vote in 5 states in one election. Like, no, the dude can't vote for the opposition.
Well, there was an MSNBC contributor who said to current Republicans who are opposing this, why are you siding with Confederates? This man's trying to overthrow democracy. So we need to take Trump out of the options in order to preserve democracy because he is against democracy.
It's a very strange approach to democracy, isn't it? Because even if he is everything that they say he is, surely if you actually cared about democracy, people should still be able to vote for him. Like if democracy was your main value, right? It doesn't matter what someone believes. But that's not the case, is it?
But that's the interesting thing. Like, that doesn't convince anyone.
No.
Like, unless you're dealing with a rabid Democratic partisan, no one is believing any of this crap. And yet they're still willing to keep putting their knee on the neck, in which they're just like, no, whatever happens, he's not allowed to be part of the election.
So this is quite interesting as well. Part of the, this is Viva Frey pointing out in the Colorado ruling, this part. So along the same lines, the Federal Bureau of Investigations received many tips regarding the potential for violence on January 6th. So I'm going to scroll down and read one of the quotes that they've included in their ruling. They think they will have a large enough group to march into DC armed and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped. They believe that since the election was stolen, it's their constitutional right to overtake the government during this coup. No US laws apply. Their plan is to literally kill. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further. So why would the FBI get this tip and perhaps not take it seriously? It's almost like Trump made an enemy of the FBI by rightfully criticizing them, and they have allowed him and his supporters to walk into some sort of trap.
Well,
it's funny, that, isn't it?
The interesting implication is they did act on it. They absolutely acted on it. That's why the director, I think she was assistant director, wouldn't tell Ted Cruz whether or not there were federal agents operating during January 6th and how many. And it's not that they didn't act on this tip.
Well, that's
likely actively facilitated the
They acted on it in a very different way, in that they encouraged it. Ray Epps, as you mentioned.
Yeah. It's curious how all the regime media run interference for this one guy, and he's one of the only guys caught on camera saying we need to go into the Capitol.
It's funny. So there have been lots of responses. Of course, one of the main ones is from Trump. So this is what he posted on Truth Social. I like this account because it means I don't have to go on multiple websites, but he just says, a sad day in America, as well as what a shame for our country, which, I completely understand those sentiments. And here is another. Biden should drop all of the, all in caps, by the way. Biden should drop all of these fake political indictments against me, both criminal and civil. Every case I'm fighting is the work of the DOJ and White House. No such thing has ever happened in our country before. Banana Republic, election interference.
I love the image of him like fat thumbing it on the gold toilet in Trump Tower to the.
So Razorfist had quite an interesting perspective on this.
Godspeed.
He said, a state-level court in Colorado using a federal-level amendment as a pretext to remove a candidate from a ballot in a federal election is some laughed clean out of court cock and bull. But the point isn't necessarily for it to stick. The intent is to trigger a cascade to normalize this for other blue and purple states, which is why it isn't enough to merely overturn this at the Supreme Court level. Consequences such as disbarment or, yes, even prosecutions of the prosecutors and judges must be imposed, or the cascade will continue and the courts will continue to grab for electoral powers they do not possess. And if any lessons from history that we might have learnt over our study of it, it is that if people are presented with an opportunity to consequence-free grab at power, which they may well be able to get away with, they probably will.
Well, the Democrats are right in saying that the Constitution is living and breathing, not in that the text of the Constitution is up for interpretation, but that the Constitution can only be applied as long as the people applying the law believe in it, and they just don't believe in it. Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing here is a diversion away from procedure and the rule of law towards consensus reality. And with the procedure being the punishment for Trump, it doesn't matter whether or not it's going to be overthrown by the Supreme Court in this one case. If California does it, if all of the other Democrat dominoes fall, then they've got too many moles to play whack-a-mole with, and you're just going to get a country split in two, where he's going to be on half the ballots in the red states and just not on any in the blue states. They're just all going to agree to strike it.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's already started because the California Lieutenant Governor has written to the Secretary of State to explore every legal option to remove the former President Donald Trump from California's 2024 presidential primary ballot. So there we go. And there are also some other responses from people purportedly on the right. Vivek Ramaswamy is saying that he pledges to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot until Trump is allowed back on the ballot. And I very much agree with Matt Walsh's perspective on this, that Matt Walsh says, unpopular opinion, but I don't think this is the right move. You aren't punishing the left by withdrawing from the ballot. Of course. I mean, I would have thought that this was obvious. If anything, you're just encouraging them to keep doing this kind of thing. A protest has to hurt the enemy or it's totally ineffective. How does this hurt the enemy?
Okay, but the goal isn't to hurt the enemy with what Vivek's doing here. This is the thing. This is why it's a short-sighted reading. The goal is for Vivek to further align with Trump. So Trump being the front runner by a factor of 5 to 10 is going to be the Republican nominee whether or not he's sitting in prison for some bogus charge. And so Vivek's going, okay, he's most likely going to pick a female VP, but I'd rather he pick me. And if I'm straight out the gate, legitimizing things like the Great Replacement and the like, making a lot of rhetorical breathing room for talking points on the right, and I'm the fiercest critic of the regime while also being the most loyal to Trump out of the primary candidates, then I'm going to firmly slot myself in as a VP or cabinet pick. And so Vivek's lining himself up for a job.
Well, if Trump can't run in half the states, it's a pretty short-sighted thing to do, don't you think?
Yeah, but it does. But this is what I'm saying. What election will be accepted if the leading candidate for the opposition is not on the ballot? But it actually doesn't matter if they're going to take him off the ballot, really. Because one, there'll be write-ins. Two, there'll be riots. There will be riots. If he's struck off all of the primary ballots and the election ballots in blue states, nobody's going to accept an election. I'm not saying it's right.
That's the more philosophical reason for taking yourself out, which is, okay, we just have to do whatever we can as the right to delegitimize the election then, because you have just made it completely unacceptable by taking off the opposition candidate, which is happened in a lot of countries throughout history for a long time. Like the Serbs, very often, if there was an election they just didn't recognize, they just wouldn't turn up and vote. And obviously they'd lose the election because like only the Croats or something could vote in whatever election's going on. But it meant that the election was completely null and void. No one really cared about it. So there is a reason for doing this. It's not just the Serbs. There's plenty of others. But I mean, again,
it's a risk, though, isn't it?
Well,
that strategy.
That's the game you've got to play. I mean, if your candidate can't even be on the ballot, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So there's.
Well, the writing's not on the wall yet. In that, this could go to the Supreme Court and it could get.
But Razorfist makes an interesting point though, because Colorado, for example, if you look at any of the polling, even with everything that's gone on that's swung back towards Trump's favor, Colorado is a deeply blue state. They're
Well,
going
11 points.
They're going to go Joe Biden. So of all the places to start it, and then California,
Yep.
another place that is going to go to Joe Biden. Of course, start
Mhm.
there and then move it into the swing states to actually properly rig the election. Because I did some calculations the other day because I wanted to see like what the effect of this was. So I just looked up the polling for the various states that could swing. And Donald Trump is planning to, at least by the polling, probably win a massive outright majority. He's getting 312 electoral seats by just running on, what is it, a 2270 election campaign.
It is also worth. Oh,
website.
sorry. It is worth mentioning that even in Colorado, which, to my knowledge, tends to be quite blue, right? It was a 4-3 vote to do this, right? You get to a state where, Trump actually stands a good chance of winning, and perhaps their judiciary are going to be a bit more torn.
Well, one of the reasons they're bricking it as well is because of population changes, and Charlie Kirk's done the map on this. The electoral college seats are weighed more towards Republican-leaning swing states and Republican states because of the amount of outflow from California to places like Texas and Florida. So Trump has got an electoral college advantage as well as just a polling advantage. So that's probably why they're trying to fortify it as hard as they can.
I mean, in this case, they're just doing it outright. I mean, that's fascinating, frankly, for an end of an American empire. This is a hell of a way to go. But I'm just thinking of the real funny output that could happen if, let's say, California takes him off the ballot. He obviously was never going to win there anyway, so it seems kind of pointless. But then the election results of 2024 show that California voted 99% for Joe Biden.
It's a bit North Korean, isn't it?
Yeah. And suddenly, I don't know, Donald Trump's total vote share compared to Joe Biden's is like way lower, but he's got way more electoral college votes. I mean, every attempt here just seems to be to try and delegitimize elections because they know they're definitely going to lose here.
It's like everything's being controlled by someone trying to undermine the notion of democracy, isn't it? It's funny. It's all being done in the name of democracy, and yet it's doing the complete opposite.
It's just skin suiting, classic skin suiting.
So the final thing I wanted to draw attention to is that the Daily Caller spoke to a bunch of law professors and people like that, and a lot of them were saying that the likelihood is, even though some of the rulings might have grounding at the state level, it might not. It's likely to be struck down in the Supreme Court. But I've been going on for quite a while, so I'm not going to go through and read all of them out. But basically, they're saying, yes, likelihood is in the Supreme Court this is going to get struck down. But of course, you can never say never. You can't necessarily guarantee it because, as with many courts, these sorts of decisions can be unpredictable and unprecedented. And so it's certainly something to keep an eye on, particularly if you're American. I have a lot of concerns about the direction of your country, and I hope that it all goes well and things are resolved peacefully and safely and sensibly. Patriotically, yes. Good save, Callum. But I would be very surprised if things work out for the best in the end.
If you enjoyed that segment from Podcast of the Lotus Eaters, why don't you check out what we got on our website, such as this Lads Hour, where Count Dankula comes in and better not spoil it. In fact, can't really talk about it because it's not safe for work. But anyway, sign up on Podcast of the Lotus Eaters at lotuseaters.com.